Hello and welcome to my presentation. My name is Travis Cat. I want to start off by saying I have a 2-year-old and a 1-month-old, so if you end up hearing them in the background, I hope that we can see it more as a color commentary than a disruption, but I apologize ahead of time. I'm sure no one can relate to that here in the class. So the project that we worked on in Capstone 2 was addressing hunger, reducing food waste at the retail level. The original group participants were myself, Deanne Prince, Fernando Rodriguez, who's actually in our Capstone 3 group, Sandy De Giovanni, and Ashley Williams. It was a fantastic group to work with. Really enjoyed my time with them, and we were able to get a lot of work done and really personalize our project. So a little overview of our project. We chose to focus in on hunger. We had a topic that could have been hunger or nutrition, and we chose to primarily focus in on the hunger section of it, as well as we focused our brief on the United States. We did have a group member from Canada, so we had to come together as a group and decide which region we wanted to focus in on. And there's a little bit more data, a little bit more research into food waste here in the US. And since the majority of our group members were from the US, we figured that was the most logical way of going about it. So we focused in on food waste. The main culprit of food waste is generally identified as the retail sector. So, these large grocery stores like Walmart, Fry's, Smith's, Brolum's, whichever one. And so then we gave examples of current approaches, how people are working on reducing food waste now, and success stories. We then gave our proposed solution for a very localized policy that could help out, one community that one of our members represented, and then ways that we can look toward the future, because in our research it was shown that by 2050, the estimation is that the world is going to need 6% more food production than it has now, or 6% more food, I guess is the more appropriate term, because if we can reduce waste, we don't need as much production. And the US will not be unaffected by this, so we really wanted to show that even though, yes, our project was focused in on the US, this was a problem, this was a issue that needed a global focus as well. So the first data that we wanted to present was the need to reduce food waste because of food security status in the US. Even though the US produces a massive amount of food every year, there is a break in the chain from getting the food to the table to the landfill. The table, even though we get the majority of food makes it to tables and all that, there's still a good percentage that goes straight from the retail sector to the landfill. And this is unfortunate because, as you can see in this graph, there's still around 12% of people who live in food insecure households, which means that they either don't know where their next meal is coming from, or it's to the extreme point where they haven't eaten in days and they don't know when they will. Or they have to go to soup kitchens, food stamps, whatever situation they may be in, they don't have access to food in ways that the other 87-ish, 88%-ish of the population does. So we found these statistics just absolutely mind-boggling, that as we were doing our research, some different papers and research projects were showing that 33% of food worldwide is wasted, and that's even higher in the US. 40% of all food in the US is wasted. Some of our data was from a little bit ago, so 1995, 20 years ago, it was shown that we lost 95 billion pounds of food at the retail, food service, and household levels in the U.S. So that includes everything. That's not just retail. That's also food that gets wasted at restaurants or kitchens, and then as well as at the household level. But this is an alarming rate: 95 billion pounds, 40% of all food in the U.S., 33% worldwide. So it's the equivalent of if we were to go out to the farmer's field and we were to pick, let's just say tomatoes, for every 3 tomatoes that you pick, just throw one of them automatically away, and that would be the equivalent of the food waste. Whereas, if there's these hungry families, if instead of throwing the tomato away, if we could just give that to them, that could be a huge help. Because otherwise it's just being wasted. It's not like the food is being used in productive ways. It's going to the landfill, which is increasing the mass that we have in landfills. So it's overfilling the landfills, and then we have a trash and waste issue as well. So there's a lot of irons in this fire. Whereas if we can take care of this, a lot of solutions could come up, and it could help out with a lot of different things. So as I reported earlier, our project focused in on the retail sector because we were looking at social change, social policy. So we didn't want to do anything that was too geared toward family, besides education, obviously, but we weren't looking at having any sort of laws or policies enacted toward the family. We felt like that was a little bit too invasive. But at the retail level, we learned that, first of all, they're the highest producer of food waste compared to restaurants, who generally have a bottom line to take care of, so they're not going to waste as much food in order to keep costs down. As well as at the home level, the same kind of deal, where most people are trying to save money, so they're not going to try and waste too much food. But we learned that at the retail level, 1 in 7 truckloads of delivered perishable food would be thrown away. So if you see those big trucks on the highway just driving down, the equivalent of that is, every few minutes look at one of those trucks and just imagine it being packed with food, and then it just takes a turn into the landfill, and that's the equivalent of that. We're losing a ton of food, as we highlighted in the previous slides. This was a fun little tidbit that we wanted to throw in there, and I touched on it in the previous slide as well, but food waste is the single largest material sent to landfills. So more than plastic, more than paper, more than packaging or anything else, it's actually food waste that's taking up most of the space. And the good news of that is food is biodegradable, so over time it will break down, unlike plastic and some of the different packaging and larger materials that you see. But on the downside, is if food is the single largest material, that's a ton of wasted resources that are going to a landfill, where they're not going to be able to serve a need as opposed to if we can redirect that food into more productive avenues. So I'm sure some of you may have been asking, well, but how come food is being thrown out? What's some of the different factors that are coming behind it? And there's a few different reasons why food might be thrown out. One of them being deformity, or a lack of shelf appeal. And as we look in this picture, if you were to look at these 2 apples, these are the same apple, same type of apple. It's going to have the same nutritional value. They're both within the same crop, so there's not one that's older than the other. But if you had to choose, which one would you want to buy? Which one would you want to eat? I'm sure most of you would say obviously the one on the left, because when we look at that, that's what we expect an apple to look like. The one on the right kind of looks like a pair of lungs because it's deformed grocers know that they're not going to be able to sell it. People are not going to want to buy that apple, so instead of them buying it, it generally gets thrown away. We toss it out. Another reason that food can be tossed out or wasted is the misunderstanding of expiration and sell-by dates. You can have a can of beans, let's say, that the date says past the expiration date. That doesn't mean it's no longer okay to eat. That food can be used, still up to a certain time and would be just fine. But oftentimes you'll see people who say, oh, look, the expiration date was on July 30th. It's July 31st. I got to toss this out. That's not the case at all. You have to use your best judgment, and you can look at the food and say, yeah, it's still good. There's no issue. But a lot of people don't understand that. And so as soon as the expiration date hits, they toss it out. And even if we weren't to, even if you were to say, okay, we can't eat that food for the expiration date, we could use that food for a couple other different avenues, such as composting, as well as feeding livestock. So I'm not sure how many of you have ever had chickens or pigs before, but they'll eat just about anything. It doesn't really matter what. So, if you have table scraps, if you have food that you have decided, okay, even though it's past the expiration date, I've done my due diligence, and yeah, we shouldn't eat this food. You give that to a chicken or a pig that you're raising, and all of a sudden, instead of it going to the landfill where it's going to break down and degrade in the dump, you've now given it to a livestock where you're able to produce more food in the future for yourself because of your alternate way of taking care of it. So I found this fun little food recovery hierarchy that was produced by the EPA. The EPA, I was mentioning in earlier slides about a lot of people having, irons in the fire, and the EPA is one of them, because as we have increased farmland, farms take a lot of water. Generally you have to cut down trees in order to have these farms. So deforestation can be part of it as well. So if we were able to reduce food waste, then that would also increase our water levels and increase our forest, and so our oxygen levels, our clean air levels. So I thought it was pretty cool that the EPA is focusing on food recovery as well, and recognizing that if we could reduce food waste, then we can have some better environments around as well. So they had a few different options. I'm just going to go from top to bottom. The most preferred option would be to reduce the volume of surplus food generated. So part of it is that farms are overproducing, and that's because they have to recognize that, as we talked about earlier, if their crops are malformed or look a little bit different, they're not going to be able to get a profit off of them. So they have to overproduce, taking into account that not all the crops are going to be identical. And then the next step under that, of taking care of the surplus food, is to feed hungry people, which is what our group focused in on. Donating the extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, shelters. We have an excess of food. Maybe it's not that pretty, or maybe it's a little bit past its expiration date, or maybe it's just getting to the point where it needs to move from the shelf to a different avenue. And so one way of doing that is, instead of sending it to the landfill, send it to the food banks, the kitchens, the shelters. The next step under that, which I touched a little bit on, was feed the animals. So instead of sending food to the dumps, diverting it to animal feed, whichever that may be. This was one I didn't really know about, so I was pretty excited to do a little bit of research into it. So the industrial uses, providing waste oils for rendering and fuel conversion, food scraps for digestion to recover energy. So I had a buddy in high school that he converted his diesel engine into being able to run on cooking grease, like cooking oil. So he would go around and he'd go to McDonald's, and he'd go to all these different fry places, and he'd get their waste cooking oil, and then he'd use it to make his own fuel. So that's along those lines, but on a more larger scale, obviously, because industrial uses. Composting, which we talked a little bit about, taking food scraps and then diverting it into the soil so that you have a better soil for growth. So you can make your own garden, or you can contribute it to a community garden so that even if you're not benefiting from it, others in your community can. And then the last resort, which is unfortunately generally the first resort, is the landfill. So this is the food recovery part of it. And then you might be saying, Walmart's first attempt, what does that have to do with it? We just presented the two ideas together because Walmart took an initiative, throughout all their stores to reduce food waste. But as we were reviewing their goals, they had 7, 8, 9, 10, I can't remember the exact number, different parts of the initiative. There was a lot to focus on. There was a lot of things they were trying to do, a lot of balls they were juggling. And their first attempt to implement these solutions and reduce waste actually increased their waste by 15%. So when our group noticed that, we decided, okay, let's learn from that mistake. Let's learn from having too many things going on, and let's focus in maybe on one solution that we can propose that could help benefit the community that we were focusing on. So we then had the opposite side, which was Kroger. If you ever shopped at Fry's or Smith's or those kind of grocery stores, those are all under the Kroger brand. And they also had an initiative to reduce food waste. This was back in 2015, so it wasn't too long ago. And their focus was just purely on donation. That's what they focused on, was donating food that otherwise would have gone to the landfill. So Kroger Foods donated over 56 million pounds of food in 2015. And they were able to reduce their waste because of this. And so because we saw that it was successful for Kroger, we thought, okay, let's look at a few different success stories. Let's look at a few different things, and let's focus in on what they did right for our proposed solution. So our first order of business then as a group was, let's make a proposal that focuses on food donation. So before going into this case study that we found, let's first give a huge shout out to the autosave feature, because my computer just did something it never did before, and the screen froze on me, and I had to reboot, and I thought I was going to have to start everything over from the beginning, but luckily my computer auto-saved not my entire presentation, but at least to this slide. So as Dr. Purohito pointed out in her syllabus, Murphy's Law is real. If it can go wrong, it will go wrong, because my computer has never done that before. So if I sound a little bit different, it's because I had to move into a different room because my 2-year-old decided to come out in full force. So now I'm hiding in here to finish my presentation. Anyway, so that was just a little fun color commentary. This case study that we found in France, so we had this YouTube video. France passed a law a couple years ago that made it so that grocery stores of a certain size, retailers of a certain size in France, could not throw away food to the landfill. If they had extra food that was going to go to waste, that they were going to send to the landfill, they instead had to partner with local food banks and charities and donate the food to them, which is incredible. We thought that was just fantastic. Some of the key points of the video, I'd highly recommend that you watch the video, but in case you don't, some of the key points, they talked a little bit about food waste that would be going to the landfill. They cite it as the second largest mass of items in the landfill. I cited it previously in the PowerPoint as the first largest. Regardless of which statistic is true, we know that it is a large amount. And then one of the other things that they pointed out in the video that I found either I don't know what the right word choice is, but appalling or ridiculous are the two words that come to mind. Is that there are some retailers here in the U.S. that, in order to keep people from rummaging in their dumpsters to get food that is still good, but that they're planning on throwing away, they'll actually cover the food waste in their dumpsters with bleach to keep people from going through it, which I think decreases people's humanity even more than they're at when they have to rummage for food, as well as um, if you're going to do that, then why don't we just make it so that food can get to these people that need it and to the food, the soup kitchens, the food banks, the charities, things along those lines. So here's the moment I'm sure you've all been waiting for, our policy brief, our proposal. So as a group. So our focus was on the Fairbanks Walmart and the Fairbanks Community Food Bank. So we didn't want to focus on too many retailers at once or too many areas. If you remember in Capstone 2, they really wanted to be very focused in, like they didn't want too big of ideas. They wanted them very implementable. So we chose the Fairbanks Walmart because of our group members. I'm from Arizona. Fernando, who's also in our Capstone 3 group, is from California. Ashley's from Idaho. Deanne is from Canada. And Sandy, who is a traveling medical professional, happened to be in Fairbanks at the time. So we thought Fairbanks would be a good community to look at, a good sized community, not too big like the Phoenix area, but not too small. And so we focused our proposal onto the Fairbanks Walmart and the Fairbanks Community Food Bank, and we said, all right, what if we can do what France did, do what Kroger did, and let's donate the food from Walmart, not focusing in on too many interventions, not getting too extravagant, and get the food from Walmart that would be thrown out and get it to the Fairbanks Community Food Bank. And the food bank would be, picking up the food. They'd be the ones to come and collect it. And we recommended daily, but at the same time, based on the needs of the community, if it needed to be every other day or weekly or whatever frequency they needed, we'd be open to that as well. We geared the proposal to both the Fairbanks Walmart and to the Fairbanks City Council, and to the food bank itself, so that we could get equal partnership from the private sector, the nonprofit sector, and the government sector. And if you remember the past statistic, we talked about how about 12-13% of the population in the U.S. is food insecure, was the term that it used. If that same statistic holds true to Fairbanks, Fairbanks is a community of about 97,000, meaning through this partnership, we'd be able to help around 12,000 or more individuals who are food insecure in becoming more secure, reducing hunger, reducing stress that comes from food insecurity and food hunger. Because as we were doing our research, we found that the way that the Fairbanks food bank works is that you're only allowed to pick up a certain number of food boxes per month or per year because of the need of the food bank and the need of the community. So if we were able to get donated food from Walmart to the food bank, then that would increase the number of food boxes that people can get and increase the eligibility for food boxes for people in the community as well. So that was our proposal. We gathered the contact information for all the individuals that we wanted to address, and we put together, the ideas that we got from Kroger, from the EPA, from the law that was passed in France, and the data and research that we collected, and we put that together. So in conclusion, some of our expectations for the local impact within the Fairbanks community is that there be decreased food waste by Walmart, and because of that, a decreased food waste in the landfills in that area. There'd be decreased hunger and food insecurity in the Fairbanks community with the increased amount of food that was available to them. As I touched in the last slide, at the food bank, there'd be an increased amount of food boxes. And it'd create a local partnership between this large retail and local community. Oftentimes when you see, these large retailers or stores like, Walmart or Best Buy or what are some other ones? Gosh, I'm completely blanking on like large retailers, Kohl's, whoever. You see them as a store and you know that they're in your community, but you don't often see them as part of the community as you get from like local mom and pop shops and restaurants. So by increasing the partnership, by increasing the benevolence that Walmart could do by donating food to the food bank, it bring increased ties with the community, which means increased sales, increased profits. It'd just be beneficial to everyone involved by creating that strong local community partnership that would go on to help the community and help the retailer. It would be a win-win situation, or at least that is our expectation of what could happen based off of our proposal. And then one of our other conclusions was, okay, if it works in Fairbanks, why couldn't it work in other communities? So we decided to kind of come with a looking toward the future conclusion and expectations as well. So the successful implementation in Fairbanks could provide a template for other cities nationwide. If it's working in France, if it works for Kroger, if it can work for Walmart, it can work for anyone. So once the proven template provided to other communities and other retail chains, we would see even more increased increased donations, increased to charities, food banks, soup kitchens. So we would see a decrease in those key factors of food waste in landfills and hunger and food insecurity for that 12%-ish of the population. And we can cut that jump from food to table, from food to landfill, and focus it on food to table. So that's it for my presentation. This is about where my computer weirded out on me last time, so I'm hoping I can conclude this presentation effectively. So here are the references if you wanted to know where we got our data from. Here are the different agencies, different research projects and studies that we focused on. I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to my group members, Deanne, Sandy, Fernando, and Ashley. Once again, Fernando was also in the group and he's in our Capstone 3 group. So if you're wanting to hear the same presentation from a different perspective, go over and check his out. He might have data that I may have missed out on, or he might be a better presenter than me. I know Fernando's pretty good student, so I wouldn't doubt that. The questions that I'll be posing, I will be putting into the discussion forum on the thread, so be on the lookout for that. And if you have any follow-up questions or things that you wanted to talk about, feel free to outreach me on the thread that I'll be creating. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching this, and congrats to everyone who's presented. We're just about there, so we gotta keep pushing forward.